Chromatography. Chromatography is used to separate and identify the components in a mixture that can be a solid or a liquid containing non-volatile components. So here this is a technique that is used for two purposes. One is to separate the components and the other is to identify the components. And also they are a mixture of non-volatile components. It can be in the solid state or the liquid state. And there are many different types of chromatography. The method carried out using paper, that is cellulose, is known as paper chromatography. Now students, this is a technique where we use two phases. One phase is known as the mobile phase and the other phase is known as the stationary phase. So, if we take the example paper chromatography, if we have a piece of paper like this that is dipped in a solvent, say only a small part of the paper is in contact with the solvent. You would have seen this observation. Maybe if you dip a small piece of paper, a strip of paper in a petri dish containing water, what will you observe? Obviously, you will see that the moisture will rise up along the paper. Now, this is the migration or movement of water molecules along the paper. I told you all there are two phases. Now, the paper doesn't move. So, we call this the stationary phase because it does not move, the stationary phase. Whereas, the liquid or the solvent, it moves along the paper. So, therefore, it's known as the mobile phase. Now, here we only have the stationary phase and the mobile phase. What if we have a mixture? A mixture on the paper. Now, the mixture has many components that are non-volatile, which do not evaporate very easily. But what will happen is the components of the mixture have different type of solubility or attraction towards the stationary phase and the mobile phase. Some components prefer to combine with the stationary phase. Some components of the mixture prefer to combine with the mobile phase. So, what will happen is if we have, let's say we have components A and B in the mixture. A and B are the components present in the mixture. A prefers the mobile phase and the B prefers the stationary phase. So, what will happen is when the mobile phase, that is water here, moves along the paper, component A of the mixture will move along the paper as well. Whereas component B that prefers the stationary phase, that is the paper or cellulose, that is the main component present in paper, that will retain more with the paper. So, because of that, when the mobile phase moves along the stationary phase, the two components will get separated out. Component A might move up to this point and component B will be left behind. So, there we get the separation of both the components. And there are different methods that are used to identify these two components once they are separated. With that, we will look at the procedure. Add a little amount of water to a petri dish and dip one end of a dry strip of a filter paper in it. So, as I explained, the paper is the stationary phase. So, here we are going to use a piece of filter paper. There are many different papers. You can buy the chromatography paper itself. Otherwise, we can use the filter paper, we can use a blotting paper, a Roneo paper, or even an A4 paper can be used for this technique. It can be observed that a stream of water particles is soaked up the strip of the paper from bottom to top. That is the movement of water. So, what do we call water? That is the mobile phase. Even when water is replaced by compounds such as acetone, ether and ethyl alcohol, a flow of liquid which flows up from the bottom to top can be seen. That is what I explained before. The strip of paper is called the stationary phase, while the solvent that is soaked into it is called the mobile phase. So, in addition to water, we can use acetone, ethyl alcohol or ether, and in some instances, we can use a mixture of more than one solvents as the mobile phase. So, usually there are different types of papers that can be used as stationary phase. So, stationary phase can be either the filter paper used here or we can use an A4 paper or a chromatography paper . These are all different types of stationary phases. And as mobile phases, we can use water, acetone, alcohol, even ether, or a mixture of solvents. All these, the selection of the stationary phase and the mobile phase will depend on the mixture of components that we are going to separate. We will look at an example. If one component in the mixture is strongly attracted to the stationary phase, that is the paper, its rate of upward movement decreases. So, here we have the stationary phase. As I told you all before, component A prefers the mobile phase, whereas component B prefers the stationary phase. So, here the upward movement will decrease. It will move slowly. B moves slowly. If there is another component in the mixture that is relatively less attracted to the mixture, it moves up faster through the stationary phase. So, there component A moves faster because this prefers the mobile phase. So, here it shows a faster movement. And the difference in movement is known as the differential migration. They migrate at different speeds. One moves slowly, the other one moves faster. Because of this difference in the speed of movement of the components in the mixture, they get separated from one another. So, because of the attraction of the components and the two phases, they get separated. So, this is the basic principle of paper chromatography. Why we call it paper chromatography? Because the stationary phase is paper. If there was a different stationary phase, then we will give a different name to that chromatographic technique. With that, we will now carry out an activity to observe the technique of paper chromatography. Activity. Separate out the components in a chlorophyll mixture using paper chromatography. So, here the materials required, we will use filter paper. We have the spinach leaf or any other leaf can be used for this purpose. And this is the mortar and the pestle. You know the use of mortar and pestle. Then we need a boiling tube. And here we have a silk cloth and the cork or a stopper. Now this is what we are going to do. We need to take a few spinach leaves into the mortar and pestle, grind it nicely so that the chlorophyll, those are the colored pigments. If you remember, at the introduction we saw that this can be used to separate colored components. So here chlorophyll is a colored component. So when we grind the leaves well, the extract will be green in color, and what we do is we take that extract along with the ground leaf onto the silk cloth and squeeze out only the extract. And from that, we take a drop of the extract, and here we will need a capillary tube. That is a very good material or glassware present in the lab that can be used to spot the sample on the filter paper. So then we have strips of filter paper with a capillary tube. We take a very small amount of the extract, that is the spinach extract that was filtered with the silk cloth, and make a spot on the filter paper. So if this is the filter paper, we make a very tiny spot. We should be careful not to make a huge spot. Then the sample will spread throughout the paper. The separation will not be efficient. So it has to be a tiny spot. And also to make sure that there is enough of the sample, we allow the spot to dry and then re-spot it again with the same sample using the capillary tube. And once that is done, you can maybe repeat it twice or thrice depending on the requirement. And once the strip is ready, we have to connect the strip to the stopper. You have to put a slit on the stopper and insert the paper into it. that will be the stationary phase. The paper is the stationary phase that is ready to be dipped in the mobile phase. Then we take a small amount of the mobile phase there. It can be water, it can be acetone or even ethyl alcohol. So there we take the mobile phase, a small amount into the boiling tube, making sure that only the lower part, this small part of the paper, will be in contact with the mobile phase there. So in order to make it more effective, we can even cut the paper in this manner so that only this tip will be in contact with the mobile phase and we will have the spot there. So thereafter, we close the stopper holding the filter paper and stand it for some time. And when you observe, you will see how the pigments get separated. I will go through the procedure again. The method. As you can see here, we have the stopper, then we have a hook to attach the strip of paper. As I told you before, either we can put a small slit and insert the paper, or else we can connect a hook like this and hang the filter paper there. So strip of paper, boiling tube, drop of chlorophyll and the solvent. Here you can see the solvent is in contact with only a small part of the paper. So we have the method given to you here. Crush a few spinach leaves thoroughly using mortar and pestle available in the laboratory. Collect the chlorophyll extract onto a watch glass by placing the crushed paste on a piece of thin silk cloth and squeezing it. Cut a strip of chromatography or filter or A4 paper. So here we will be using a filter paper. Take a little bit of the chlorophyll extract to a capillary tube and place it on the strip of the paper a little above the end. The solvent vaporizes, leaving chlorophyll on the paper. Place another drop on the same spot. So we do this in order to increase the amount of sample. So here, in order to increase the amount of extract or the sample, connect a piece of string to the end of the paper strip opposite to that with the chlorophyll drop. Add a solvent such as acetone, kerosene or petrol to the boiling tube and stopper it. Leave it to saturate. This is an important thing. Now when we take the acetone or kerosene, these are all volatile components. Even petrol, they can vaporize quickly. So when we take the solvent, close the stopper and keep the boiling tube aside for some time. The solvent will vaporize and fill in the air present. So then the boiling tube will be saturated with the solvent, that is the mobile phase. So when we insert the stationary phase, that is the filter paper containing the sample, then the solvent will not try to evaporate and move from the sides. Instead, it will only rise along the paper. So that will prevent the spreading of the sample throughout the paper. It will only move in one direction from bottom to top and there will be efficient separation. So that is the reason we leave it to saturate. Then connect the hook to the stopper, suspend the strip on the hook so that its other end dips in the solvent. Ensure that the sides of the strip Do not touch the walls of the boiling tube. This is another thing that you have to remember. Sides of the strip do not touch the walls of the boiling tube, so that the flow of solvent occurs only in one direction. It doesn't get spread throughout the strip, and the sample doesn't get spread out. It travels in one line. That again will give efficient separation. So this is the technique of chromatography. Now let us do this activity in the lab. Okay students, so now I am going to demonstrate the chromatography technique. So we will try to see how chlorophyll, the green pigments present in leaves, are separated using this method. So for that I have already ground some leaves. These are ground leaves. From that I have to take the juice. So to get the ground juice from the leaves, I have to filter it using a cloth. So what I have to do is, what I have already ground into a paste kind of mixture, the pulp, I will transfer onto this cloth and get the extract from it. So here I have the ground leaves. If we take the extract from it, you can see it is a nice green color extract. So from this extract, I have to make a spot on the chromatography paper. You know what a chromatography paper is. I have got it ready here. You can see it's connected to a cork and you can see the shape of the chromatography paper. Here it has a sharp point, and for this purpose there are chromatography papers available in the market, or we can use a blotting paper, or even the filter paper can be used for this purpose. So on this, first I have to make a spot of the sample. To do that, I have a petri dish here. I'll place the chromatography paper on this. So to make the spot, normally we use a capillary tube. Here I'm going to use a very thin drop using the pipette. So I'll try to make a very tiny drop using this. So here you can see it's a very small drop. It would be better if you can make a tinier drop using a capillary tube, and we have to allow it to dry for some time. So here it's already dried. If the concentration is not enough, if there isn't enough sample there, then we can put another drop, but here the sample is sufficient. So now I have to get this into the chromatography setup. Now as you know students, already the chromatography depends on a mobile solvent or a mobile phase which moves along the stationary phase. Here we have the stationary phase, that is the paper, chromatography paper or the blotting paper. And I am going to use acetone as the mobile phase. So I will have to take the acetone into a boiling tube, but I have to make sure that there is enough acetone so that I can slightly dip this. The paper has to slightly touch the acetone. Too much is not good. At the same time, we should have enough acetone to be in contact with the paper. Now the tip of the paper is in contact with the acetone solvent, and you can see the solvent rising along the chromatography paper. So with the solvent, the pigments present in this chlorophyll extract will also rise along the paper. You can see the green color moving upwards. So, there the pigments that are present in the extract are getting separated. You can see the movement of the green color. Observe clearly, students. You can see the movement of the green color pigments along with the solvent. And as you know, acetone is a volatile solvent or a volatile liquid. So, it also vaporizes and saturates the container, that is the boiling tube here, so that the solvent, when it is moving upwards, doesn't spread throughout the paper. So, again you can observe the movement of the colored pigments. There the different components get separated along the way. Okay, students. So, from this activity you have observed the stationary phase, that is the chromatography paper or the blotting paper, as well as the mobile phase that I used here is acetone, and the separation is for the chlorophyll pigments, and you can see the movement of the green color. So, this technique also can be used to separate components from a mixture. Okay, students. So, you observe the chromatography being carried out in the lab. What were your observations? After we connected the strip of paper to the stopper and inserted it into the boiling tube containing acetone, what happened there? You were able to observe if this is the strip of paper. We had the small drop of sample there and we had the acetone inside the boiling tube. Only a small piece of we had a corner like that in the paper, and that was in contact with acetone. Then after some time you saw the moisture moving along the paper, and with that you were able to observe the movement of the colored pigments like this. They separated into different layers. This was the strip of paper inside the boiling tube, and there was acetone there. And this was the color separation. So, although the chlorophyll is a pigment that gives green color to the leaf, that is made up of many other components. So, when we carry out this chromatographic separation, that is paper chromatography, you will see that the different components move at different speed. So, therefore, there is a separation. If this was a procedure carried out in the analytical lab, what they will do is, once the separation is over, they take out the strip of paper, allow it to dry, and then they cut out regions from the chromatography paper. So, each region, sometimes the components separate into only small layers. Not here, but it might separate out into small spots like that. Then you can cut out each spot and extract that compound and analyze it. So, that is what we said. We can separate and analyze or identify the components of a mixture. So, this is a chromatography technique, and the result of it is called the chromatogram. So, this is the paper chromatography technique, the end result of the chromatography. And here this is the mobile phase and paper is the stationary phase. So I am sure you got the observations clearly and you have understood the technique of paper chromatography. Now we will see where we can use this paper chromatography technique or chromatographic technique. Chromatographic technique can be used to separate and identify several components when they are mixed together. So here both purposes, separate and identify components of a mixture. Find whether poisonous chemicals are mixed with water. So to identify whether poisonous chemicals are mixed with water. For that also we can use chromatographic technique. Check whether harmful substances are associated with food items. So this is also again harmful substances associated with food items. If you consider these two examples, now here water. When we have water, if there are components present in water, we can take that as the sample and do a chromatographic technique. If there are poisonous substances, then they will separate out on the chromatography paper, and also as I told you before, there are many different types of chromatography. So using one of those techniques, we can directly identify if there are any poisonous chemicals. You will learn later that there are many substances that can become pollutants to water, like heavy metals and many other organic substances. So if these are present in water, then the water is not good for consumption. Then we can identify those chemicals. The same way, if there are substances that are harmful present in food, so then what we can do is we can take an extract of the food sample, run a chromatography, and from that we can identify the harmful component. The next one, identifying active chemical compounds in plants. So when we say active chemical compounds, compounds that are present in plant and that are useful for many other purposes as well. Even chlorophyll. There are so many medicinal compounds present in plants. So these can be extracted and identified. Thereafter they can be used for different purposes. So these are the uses of chromatographic technique. So students, so far we have discussed many different separation methods. We discussed vaporization or evaporation, then crystallization, recrystallization, then we observed or discussed solvent extraction, the three types of distillation processes, simple, fractional and steam distillation processes, and finally the chromatographic techniques. Now we will look at some applications of these techniques in different industries. Uses of separating techniques. Extraction of salt from seawater. If you can remember students, we discussed two techniques related to this. One was evaporation, the other one was crystallization. So in Sri Lanka, salt is produced by the evaporation of seawater in salterns. Evaporation of seawater in salterns. Salterns is the place where they build different types of tanks. Actually, there are three types of tanks, and in those tanks, they allow the seawater to remain there for some time and let it to evaporate. So when the water evaporates, the concentration of seawater will increase and therefore the crystallization process will take place, and finally salt will be precipitated. The seawater collected in the salt pans. Salt pans are the structures where we call it the tanks, where seawater is retained and precipitation takes place, are concentrated by evaporation, during which salt crystallizes out finally. So the two techniques, the separating techniques, evaporation and crystallization, are used in this method. So this is a very common industrial process that occurs in our country, that is the salt turn method. And you would have seen these salt turns are usually present near the sea in a very hot, warm, dry area. So those are very suitable environment conditions for the production of salt. So now let us discuss the geographical and environmental factors that are needed to be considered before building a salt turn. The geographical and environmental factors that should be taken into consideration when setting up a salt turn. It has to be a flat sand situated closer to a coastal area to obtain seawater easily. So, if this is the sea, if this is the flat sand, then it's very easy to direct the seawater into this part. So, here we can build the different tanks that will be the salt turn. And the presence of a clay soil with minimum percolation of water. When we say percolation, if we take the clay soil has pores in it. Through the pores, the water can drain into the soil. That nature is known as percolation. But when we have seawater collected in the salt turn tanks, if the water goes through the clay soil, then it will not be efficient to produce salt. Therefore, the sand should not have percolation, or it should have minimum percolation. That means it should be able to retain water more without allowing it to pass through. Prevalence of dry and hot climate with bright sunlight and wind throughout the year. So, this is to make sure that water evaporates efficiently. So, this is to make sure water evaporates efficiently. And this is to retain water. An area with minimum rainfall. As we already discussed, this process depends on crystallization. For that, we need to remove the solvent, that is water, from seawater, and we need to increase the concentration of seawater. So, if there was rainfall, again the solvent water will be added to the tanks and the concentration will decrease. That will disturb the crystallization process. So, therefore, there should be an area with minimum rainfall, again to facilitate crystallization. Crystallization. So, students, you can see all the geographical and environmental factors are selected so that the evaporation process as well as the crystallization process takes place more efficiently. So, with that in mind, now we will discuss the process related to the production of salt. regarding the structure of a Saltern, 3 types of tanks can be identified. So for that, we have the large, shallow tanks, then we have the medium tanks, and then the small tanks. So we have the sea water here. Then we have the broad, shallow tanks. Then from there, when you go to the next one, these are the medium tanks. And finally, we have the narrow tanks. So the first type, large, shallow tanks. Then the second type, medium tank. And finally, we have the small tanks. If we consider the concentration of seawater is equal to, we'll take it as C. When we send the seawater into the large, shallow tank, then what happens is the concentration becomes double. That is, the water evaporates, and when the volume becomes half, the concentration becomes double. And when it becomes double, I will indicate it as 2C, double the concentration of the seawater. Then there is calcium carbonate that is present in seawater that will precipitate. That will take place in the large, shallow tank. Then we have the seawater passed from the large, shallow tank into the medium tank. There what happens is the concentration becomes 4 times more than the initial seawater. That is again due to evaporation of seawater, the volume of solvent decreases and the concentration of the salts increases. So it becomes 4 times more concentrated than initial seawater. Then there is the second compound, that is calcium sulfate. This deposits or this crystallizes in the medium tank. Then what we do is we pass the seawater into the small tank. And here the concentration of seawater becomes 10 times more than the initial concentration. Then only salt, that is sodium chloride, will precipitate. So here it becomes 10 times more than the initial concentration, and sodium chloride will precipitate there. While this sodium chloride is precipitating, there are 2 more salts. There are many more salts, but the most important ones, magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate. Now, while sodium chloride is precipitating, these 2 salts precipitate as impurities with sodium chloride. So, in addition to sodium chloride, there will be magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate. Now, these 2 can reduce the quality of salt because they have hygroscopic property. they have the tendency to absorb moisture from the environment, and also they can become watery. That will reduce the quality of salt. So, in order to prevent the reduction in quality or to increase the quality of salt, these two impurities have to be removed from salt. So, what they do is they heap up the salt, sodium chloride containing magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate near the saltons in a pyramidal structure, and they allow it to evaporate in air. They allow it to be exposed to air for about 6 months, so that the magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate that are present in salt will evaporate off, and the remaining sodium chloride will be the pure sodium chloride crystals that can be used for consumption. But then again, if we need to produce iodized salt, then there has to be another treatment that adds iodine to salt. So, this is the basic concept of producing salt. So, as you can see, we have seawater, we collect it and retain it in a tank, and the water evaporates off, the concentration increases, and when it reaches double the concentration, calcium carbonate crystallizes. Then when it becomes 4 times concentrated, calcium sulfate crystallizes. And finally, when the concentration becomes 10 times, sodium chloride crystallizes. The techniques of evaporation and crystallization are used in this process. So, we will again summarize the changes taking place in a salter. The main steps of production of salt in a salter. So, what they do is, initially we have the large shallow tanks. So, we have the large shallow tank. Into that, what they do is, initially they pump seawater, and the oils, they allow the seawater to flow into it when there is high tide. And then the seawater is allowed to evaporate due to sunlight. And when the concentration of seawater becomes double, what precipitates first? Calcium carbonate. So, here seawater is pumped in or allowed to flood during high tide. Then it is water evaporates due to sunlight. And also, you know, there is lot of wind flow as well as the environment is very warm, so that facilitates the evaporation of water. And then what happens? The concentration becomes double than the initial concentration, twice the initial concentration. Concentration becomes twice the initial value. then calcium carbonate, crystallizes and precipitates. That is calcium carbonate in the first tank. Then what do we do? The water is pumped into the second type of tanks, that is the medium tanks. So here we have the medium tank. Again here, water from the first tank is allowed to evaporate. Concentration increases to 4 times. Than the initial concentration. Then what is the substance that's going to precipitate? Calcium sulfate. So calcium sulfate crystallizes and precipitates. What is calcium sulfate? CaSO4. Then what happens? The water from the medium tank is passed into the third type of tank, the small tanks. So here, water is passed into the small tank. Inside the small tank, what happens? Water evaporates further. Water evaporates further. And the concentration increases 10 times more than the initial concentration. Then what is the compound that precipitates? Sodium chloride. Sodium chloride crystallizes and precipitates. That is NaCl. That is the salt that we need. But what happens here? While sodium chloride is still precipitating, magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate precipitate with it. And you know the problems related to these two compounds. We will see. While salt is precipitating, the concentration of the solution increases further. Even before the total precipitation of sodium chloride is complete, magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate begin to precipitate. This gives a bitter taste to salt. So, in addition to the hygroscopic and deliquescent properties, that is absorbing moisture and becoming watery, they also give a bitter taste to salt. So, then the quality of salt will decrease. The solution left after the precipitation of salt is known as mother liquor or bittern. That also contains more salts, because as you already know, seawater contains lot of salts, and the most common ones are the salts that precipitated in the different tanks of the salter. So here you have to remember the term mother liquor or bittern that also contains other salts. So here, salt deposited in the third tank is taken out, heaped in prismatic piles. What I explained as the pyramid-shaped piles or the prismatic piles at another place and stored for a period of 6 months. Pure sodium chloride is not hygroscopic. So, what I explained to you, hygroscopic means they can absorb moisture from air. But if salt contains magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate, it becomes bitter and hygroscopic when exposed to the atmosphere. But as magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate absorb moisture in the atmosphere and go into solution, with the elapse of about 6 months, most of them get removed and salt is retained as solid. That is a procedure used to obtain pure form of salt, that is sodium chloride or good quality salt. And as I told you all before, in order to produce iodized salt, then the pure salt is treated in a certain manner. A chemical reaction takes place where iodine is added to produce iodized salt. Otherwise, the salt, that is the pure salt, also can be used for consumption. Okay, students. So, in this process of producing salt in the salterns, there were different stages where different compounds precipitated. Initially, it was calcium carbonate, and then we saw that it was calcium sulfate. So, here if you remember, initially calcium carbonate precipitated. Then it was calcium sulfate, and finally it was sodium chloride. But before sodium chloride could completely precipitate, the magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate started precipitating. Why did they precipitate separately like this in different tanks? You saw that here the concentration was 2 times more than seawater. Here the concentration was 4 times more than seawater. And sodium chloride, the concentration was 10 times more than seawater. And when sodium chloride started to precipitate, the concentration increases further. So this is more than 10 times of the initial concentration. So as you can see, these compounds precipitated when the concentration increased. That is because calcium carbonate has less solubility in water. So when the concentration is twice itself, it precipitated. But calcium sulfate dissolves a little bit more. So it had to reach a concentration of 4 times more than the initial concentration. Whereas if you take the solubility of sodium chloride, that is highly soluble compared to these two. That is why it starts crystallizing only when the concentration is 10 times more than seawater. So this precipitation order is directly related to the solubility of these compounds in water. That is something that you have to remember, students. So here if I write solubility in water, calcium sulfate is more soluble. Sodium chloride is even more soluble, and magnesium chloride and magnesium sulfate are more soluble than sodium chloride. So this is also something that you have to remember, students. Okay. With that, we will move on to the next industrial process, extraction of essential oils. You all already know what essential oils are, and we have discussed one method of extracting these essential oils. What was that procedure? It was steam distillation. And why did we use steam distillation there? So that the essential oils do not get denatured or get destroyed or get converted to other compounds in the process of extracting. And when they mix with water, the boiling point decreases and they boil at a temperature less than the boiling point of water. So they can be extracted without any harm done to the compounds. Volatile compounds obtained from plant materials are referred to as essential oils. So again, the term volatile compounds. Compounds that can easily evaporate or can be converted to vapor form. Some main essential oils produced in our country are given below. Cinnamon leaf oil, cinnamon bark oil, citronella oil, pepper oil, cardamom oil, nutmeg oil, clove bud oil and eucalyptus oil. So here you can see there are different plants and the different parts like leaf, bark, then you can see the bud, again eucalyptus is the leaf. So here you can understand that we can extract these essential oils from different parts of plants, even floral parts of plants which give different fragrance. And all these oils have lot of value. They are used as essential oils in food as well as medicines, pharmaceutical industry, and we have already discussed the uses of these essential oils. First, we will look at a table where we have the different parts of the plant from which we extract different essential oils. The plant and the parts in which essential oils are formed is given to you. Vetiver that has essential oil in its roots. Sandalwood has it in the stem. Cinnamon, it has in many different parts, the bark, root and the leaf of cinnamon contains essential oils. As you already know, we use the bark for cooking. As a condiment, we add cinnamon bark to food. Root has essential oils and we use the cinnamon leaf to extract essential oil using steam distillation. So that is a plant where you get many essential oils in all three parts of the plant. Then we have citronella that has essential oils in the leaf, lemongrass that also in leaves, and eucalyptus again in leaves. Most of these essential oils have medicinal value. Then we have clove, the floral parts, the buds and the floral parts. Rose and jasmine, again the flower. You all know these are used to produce perfumes, the different fragrances, rose fragrance, jasmine fragrance, all the different flowers. Then we have lemon and lime. The fruit contains the essential oil. And finally, nutmeg, the seed contains the essential oil. So these are some examples of plants and where we find the essential oils. Next, we will look at the procedure. Extraction of essential oils by steam distillation. You already know the setup that is used in the lab to carry out steam distillation. This is an industrial setup. So here you can see there is enough heat given to a tank containing water, and from there the steam is generated and the steam passes through this tube. And here there is an outlet to give out the smoke or carbon dioxide, all that is produced during heating. And then the steam enters into the second type of tank where we have the cinnamon leaves. That is an example, the plant part. So what happens there? With the steam, the essential oils that are dissolved or mixed with water also vaporize. So from this tank, a vapor, that is a mixture containing water and the essential oil, comes out of this tube. And here you can see this is a spiral structure where the vapor has to travel in a spiral manner. What did we discuss with the condenser structure? When vapor goes from the top to bottom, water flows from bottom to top, and there is an opposite direction in the two flows. So there it prevents it actually slows down the movement of steam, and there is enough water around the steam, so that gives rise to very efficient cooling. So here you can see vapor is coming down through this spiral shaped tubing and the tank contains water. So due to this cooling process, here the essential oil will be collected, and here this will be collected in the form of cinnamon oil and water. And as you already know, these essential oils are immiscible with water. So they separate out into layers, then the two layers can be separated easily and they can be used for their purposes. So that is another technique of separation that is used in the industry, extraction of essential oils by steam. With that, we will move on to obtaining essential oils by solvent extraction. So the first method was steam distillation. There are two other methods. The second method is by solvent extraction. You all can remember the process of solvent extraction. We have solvent 1. The essential oil will be dissolved in that, but the solubility will be less in solvent 1. So what do? We add solvent 2. Mix them together so that the essential oil from solvent 1 gets extracted to solvent 2. So that is the process of solvent extraction. Solvent extraction is another method of extracting essential oils. Organic solvents such as ether, chloroform and toluene are used in this method. These are 3 different solvents and they are organic solvents. When plant parts are shaken with the solvent, essential oil dissolves in the solvent. The essential oil is separated by letting the solvent to vaporize. So here these are solvents that can vaporize easily. So this process is again solvent extraction. Then the third type of separation method is this. Volatile oils in some plant parts can also be obtained by compressing them under a suitable pressure. So this is the third method of separation. Compressing them. Say if it's a leaf, when leaf is kept between the compressing equipment and when that is given a certain amount of pressure, the essential oil present is squeezed out of the leaf. So there are 3 methods of separation that are used to separate essential oils from plants. With that, we will move on to the summary. Matter can be divided into 2 parts, pure substances and mixtures. So you all know what pure substances are, the elements and the compounds. When they all mix and exist together, where there are more than one components, we call them as mixtures. In natural environment, pure substances are very rare. What is more abundant are mixtures. You know many examples. Sea water, the atmospheric air, the soil, all the minerals. The substances formed by mixing 2 or more substances without any chemical changes. This is something that you have to remember. Without any chemical changes are called mixtures. That is why the physical and chemical properties of the components are retained even in the mixture. The components of a mixture can be separated by physical methods. So, if there were chemical changes, they won't remain the same. So, we can't separate them by physical methods. But here in a mixture that is possible. That is what we call as a mixture. We should be able to separate the components by physical methods. A mixture is a homogeneous mixture when its components are uniformly distributed. If not, it is a heterogeneous mixture. If the composition and the distribution of components is uniform throughout the solution or the mixture, we call it homogeneous. If it is not uniform, then it's known as heterogeneous mixture. A homogeneous mixture is also referred to as a solution. Characteristics such as concentration, color, density and transparency of any minute part of a solution are identical. That is the important thing. It has to be identical throughout the solution. In heterogeneous mixtures, these are different, not identical. The composition at the bottom will be different from the composition at the top of the mixture. In a solution, the components present in greater proportion is called the solvent, and the component that is less in proportion is known as the solute. Those are the 2 main parts of a solution. So, there is only one solvent and there can be more than one solute. So, here Dissolving of a solute in a solvent depends on temperature, polar characteristics related to the molecular properties of the solute, and solvent, as well as organic or inorganic nature. So here we consider the solid and liquid solutes. When the temperature increases, the solubility increases. And also the solubility depends on the polar, non-polar and organic, inorganic nature. That is why we have 4 types of compounds: the polar organic, polar inorganic, non-polar organic and non-polar inorganic. Or in other words, we can say organic polar, organic non-polar, inorganic polar and inorganic non-polar. And as you know, the concept is like dissolves like. Polar substances dissolve well in polar solvents. Non-polar substances dissolve well in non-polar solvents. The solubility of a gas in water depends on the pressure of that gas over water and temperature. So, when the pressure of the gas above water is increased, the solubility increases. At the same time, when you increase the temperature, the solubility of gases decreases. This you have observed in soda water as well as when boiling water. Soda water, the gas dissolves well when it is under high pressure, when the bottle is closed, when it is not open. But once you open, when the pressure releases, the gas escapes. The same way, when boiling water, gases escape from water. Different notations are used to indicate the composition of a mixture. Mass fraction, that is M over M, volume fraction V over V, mole fraction, mass volume ratio, that is M over V, and mole volume ratio, that is N over V, are some of those notations. Among the different notations used, mole volume rotation, that is N over V, is known as the concentration. This is an important term that you have to remember. It has the units of moles per decimeter cube, moles per cubic decimeter. That is the common unit. And you already know there is a standard unit, that is moles per meter cube. Solutes of known composition need to be prepared for various tasks in day-to-day life. For this, various apparatus are used in the laboratory. When we say apparatus, that is one apparatus. Apparati, we need many. And as you know, students, to prepare a standard solution in the lab, we need a watch glass, a funnel, wash bottle, and a volumetric flask, and also a balance to weigh the solute accurately. The components of mixtures are separated in everyday life as well as in industry. Various methods are used for it. During sifting, floating and winnowing, components are separated by using the difference in density of the compound. You know that there are different physical properties that are utilized for separation. Sieving and filtration are carried out making use of the difference in size of the component particles. So, here that is the size difference that is used for separation. Components can be separated by vaporization due to the difference in their boiling points, another physical property. I will move on to the next part. The concentration of a solution is used in crystallization and recrystallization, where the concentration is made to exceed the saturated concentration. You all have seen or understood what saturated solutions are. Some substances have a higher solubility in one solvent and lower solubility in another. In solvent extraction, a solute dissolved in smaller quantity in one solvent is drawn into another solvent in which it is more soluble. For this, the two solvents must be immiscible. So, that is the process of solvent extraction. When separating components by distillation, the mixture is heated. The components that vaporize at their boiling points get removed from the mixture and are collected at a different place by cooling. So, for this process, we use the distillation setup, which includes a condenser. Condenser is used to cool the vapor. Depending on the differences of the techniques used and the properties of components, distillation can be divided into three modes: simple distillation, fractional distillation, and steam distillation. In paper chromatography, a stream of a volatile solvent is passed through a drop of a mixture placed on a special paper. That is paper chromatography. In this, components are separated from one another because of the difference of speed with which they travel through the paper, which in turn is caused by the differences in the strength of attraction of the components to the paper, that is cellulose. So, if the component is more attracted to the mobile phase, it moves faster. If it's more attracted to the paper, that is the stationary phase, it is retained or it moves very slowly. So, that leads to the separation of compound. So, with that, students, we have come to the end of the lesson. So, in this lesson, initially we discussed what mixtures are. Then we saw the different types of mixtures. Then we discussed the different ways of expressing composition. And then we discussed the different separation techniques and their application in different industrial processes. So, you have listened to the discussion, you would have understood the lesson, but again you have to read your textbook, and if you need, listen to the discussion again and again until you get a very clear understanding. So, thereafter you have to practice answering questions.